The global landscape is dotted by places forgotten by time. Once thriving cities left alone to slowly decay, returning to the earth brick by crumbling brick. I'm not talking about the lost cities of gold like the mythical El Dorado or the ruins of ancient civilizations like Teotihuacan. I'm talking about the boomtowns of the gold rush, the remnants of war and the products of our own hubris that were left behind in the last few hundred years. Little remnants that remind us that life can change in the blink of an eye. Windows into our past preserved in perpetuity. This is History Mystery in the Unexplained, where we explore everything from true crime to cryptids, the paranormal, and beyond. And before I begin to explore these tales set aside for today, please like, subscribe, follow, or whatever on the platform of your choice. And be sure to leave us a review. I'd love to hear what you think. Before we continue, I do want to give a trigger warning on our third story today. The tale of Oradour-Sur-Glane is highly disturbing. It includes war crimes, mass murder, and the death of children. I've included timestamps if you wish to skip that story. "9 miles off the coast of Nagasaki, Japan, sits the 16-acre Hashima Island, often referred to as Battleship Island due to its shape, seawall, and industrial ruins that give it the silhouette of a grand warship. This island has a rich history and a dark past. From 1890 until 1974, the Mitsubishi Corporation ran coal mines on the island, providing the mainland with this much-needed resource for industrial growth. At its height, the island was home to more than 5,000 residents. This might not sound like much, but again, this island is only 16 acres large. This resulted in the greatest population density in the world. To accommodate the island's large population, tall, sprawling concrete apartments were built up to 9 stories high. It's noted that these buildings did not have elevators. The stairs were narrow and crooked and placed where they could fit. Kitchens and bathrooms were often shared between families. Construction was constant and planning was almost non-existent. It sounds like the island equivalent of the Winchester Mystery House. Hashima saw its peak after World War II, and it's only then that living conditions on the island began to improve. Better infrastructure allowed for things like freshwater baths, televisions, and radios. Residents even began to plant rooftop gardens to brighten up the concrete landscape. By the 1960s, however, petroleum was becoming the world's fuel of choice, and by the 1970s, the coal mines were being run dry. When Mitsubishi closed its doors to the mine in 1974, the island became a ghost town overnight. Today, it's an UNESCO World Heritage Site, protected for its strong cultural significance to Japan's Industrial Revolution. This was met with a particular amount of controversy, however, as many of those who lived and worked on the island during the war times were not there by choice. From the 1930s until 1945, Hashima was home to a large number of Korean and Chinese prisoners who were forced to work under harsh conditions. South Korea asked as a stipulation of the island's inclusion in the World Heritage Site that Japan acknowledge their part in this dark history. Although Japan officially agreed to this, they have yet to comply. In fact, a display at the Industrial Heritage Information Center in Tokyo even goes as far as to deny forced labor was used at Hashima. In addition to being a World Heritage Site, there are tours to the island today, and sections are open to the public. Visitors to the island have heard strange noises and felt cold spots. It should come as no surprise that those wandering the narrow passages even felt watched. Many have even reported being touched, and fishermen sailing near the island at night have reported a glow coming from one of the many windows, despite the fact that the power to the island has long since been shut off. Regardless, if these are spirits of prisoners of war or those of miners, there is little question that this would be a place haunted by its past. Mining is tough work on its own. Underwater mining, even more so. 4 mine shafts snake off under the ocean, spanning for miles, one even linked underground to another nearby island at one time. These mines were plagued by gas explosion, collapses, flooding. In addition to this, these islands off the coast of Japan were regularly struck by harsh weather, typhoons. Devastated waves pounded against the concrete structures, putting the seawalls to the test. Many died here, and many continue to call this place home in the afterlife. New York City has a population density of approximately 29,300 people per square mile. Real estate is at a premium. In fact, it is one of the most expensive cities to live in the United States. Despite this fact, there are two islands in the East River, less than a mile from Manhattan, that sit completely dormant. They are North and South Brother Islands. The baby brother, the South Brother Island, consists of only 6 acres of lush greenery. It acted as the first city dump for New York, but wealthy families living in the Bronx, a short half-mile downwind from South Island, were not pleased with this arrangement. They were able to convince the city to take their trash elsewhere, and the island was left empty. The only building ever constructed on the island was owned by Jacob Ruppert. He was a brewery magnate, politician, businessman, and the owner of the New York Yankees. From 1909, when Ruppert's summer home burned to the ground, until 2007, when the city reacquired the island, it changed hands many times, having numerous private owners, but never any permanent residents. This may be in part due to its big brother a short distance to the north. Unlike its baby brother, North Brother Island saw many uses over the years and witnessed the end of many lives. Up until the 1800s, the only structure on the island had been a much-needed lighthouse, aiding travel along the treacherous waterways. In 1885, Riverside Hospital was built on the grounds to house people suffering from infectious disease. Given the high volume of immigrants to the nation at this time, quarantine facilities for infectious disease such as this one existed just outside many cities. These were the times of highly contagious diseases such as typhus, tuberculosis, yellow fever, and smallpox. Even once vaccines became available, those coming into the nation were unvaccinated. One of the darkest notes from this time in history is the reports that health inspectors would visit the impoverished areas of the city, round up the ill, and forcibly relocate them to North Brother Island. Having lived through COVID, I can understand the fears a pandemic could bring, and the beliefs that the greater good outweighs that of the individual. But dividing families and taking people away in the night is not an America I ever want to think about. To make matters worse, these are the peak times of the Great Melting Pot. There would be a vast language barrier. People would have no idea where their loved ones were going or why. And sadly, many of them would never recover and never return home. In 1904, New York would see the biggest disaster in its history to date. In fact, the only disaster to have a bigger death toll in New York is the falling of the Twin Towers on September 11, 2001. On June 15, 1904, the General Slocum burst into flames en route to Long Island. On board were almost 1,400 passengers, the majority women and children, from St. Mark's Evangelical Lutheran Church. They had chartered the boat for that day for their annual picnic. When the boat was set ablaze, Captain Van Schaik ran it ashore on North Brother Island. Patients and workers at the island, along with the crews of 2 tugboats that had arrived quickly after, did their best to save as many lives as they could. In total, there were 431 survivors, but 1,021 perished that day. 1904 also brought North Brother Island its most famous resident, Mary Mallon, also known as Typhoid Mary. She was among those forcibly incarcerated because she was an asymptomatic carrier working in the food industry. Her first stay at Riverside Hospital only lasted 3 years. She was released with the promise not to serve large groups of people food. She must have had her fingers crossed when she agreed to this, because she was found a short time later working in a hospital cafeteria. She was brought back to the island, where she lived the remainder of her days. The island continued in its capacity as a quarantine facility until 1941. Vaccinations and improved healthcare were seeing less need for such spaces. Also, immigration slowed, and with World War II in full swing, doctors and nurses were needed elsewhere. The doors didn't stay closed long, however. At the end of the war, in 1945, soldiers were coming home in large numbers, and they needed a place to live. That's when the island reopened with a new purpose. This was a short-lived, however, as housing equalized and new places were built. Fewer and fewer people were calling North Island home. The final chapter in the island's life with people occurred in the 1950s and 60s. Riverside was once again reborn, this time as Paradise, a rehab facility for drug-addicted teens. It didn't go so well. The detox method of choice was usually just to lock them in a room and wait it out. The staff was corrupt, and the facility was said to be full of drugs and sex workers. Despite the number of suggested uses in the decades that followed the closing of the rehab facility in 1965, from housing to casino to adult rehab center, nothing else ever came of the island. The forests begun to reclaim the land, birds laid their nests, and nature took over. Today, it is a protected bird sanctuary. It should come as no surprise, given the island's past, that it is also a hotspot of paranormal activity. People say that they can hear whispers and screams, see glowing orbs, and have seen people wandering the grounds in the hospital gowns, only to disappear into the night. Before we leave New York, I have one more forgotten land I want to share. On the other side of the Bronx, in the western end of the St. Lawrence Sound, lies Hart Island. When I first began reading about this mile-wide archipelago with over 1 million graves dating back to 1869, I knew it was a tale worth sharing. As I read more, homeless shelter, TB sanatorium, psychiatric institution, rehab center, reform school, jail, this all makes sense. Amusement park? Wait, what? The Negro Coney Island? What the actual? Founded in 1864. The first purpose of this island was a training ground for the United States colored troops, despite the fact that we were fighting in part for emancipation and that African Americans were viewed as equals in the eyes of the North. Sadly, equality only went so far. Disturbingly, this practice of military segregation occurred in both world wars as well. Tale for another time. Returning back to our little island, as I said before, over 1 million souls call this place home in the afterlife, making it the largest paupers field in the country. So what about the fairgrounds? In 1922, a man by the name of John Hunter, whose family originally owned all of Hart Island, found that he still owned 4 acres. His family sold the rest of the island to the city a long time ago, so why not this share? The city declined. Hunter then turned to millionaire developer of Harlem, Solomon Riley, and offered it to him at the price of $35,000, about $641,000 in today's dollars. Riley was a black millionaire a long time before the civil rights movement. He saw the amusement parks that were for whites only in places like Coney Island and thought, I want something like that for the people of Harlem. He worked to create boarding houses, a dance hall, a jazz club, and more. He even bought a fleet of 60 motorboats to take people to and from the mainland. This was the official nail in the coffin for what the media would dub Negro Coney Island. Officially, the city feared that prisoners on the island would break out of jail, seize the motorboats, and flee. The city gave Riley $144,000, more than 4 times the amount he paid for the land that they didn't want. They promptly then tore everything down. These days, many seem to believe that World War II ended on D-Day, June 6, 1944. This was a major turning point to the war, but it certainly was not the end. The war would continue for another 11 months before Germany would surrender, and it would take another 4 months beyond that, and 2 big bombs, before Japan would wave a white flag. When the Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, the Axis was caught with his pants down. Thanks to a fair amount of misinformation, the majority of Germany's troops were on the wrong side of France. However, information traveled fast, and in less than 2 days, the Das Reich was on the move. This march north was a path of bloodshed and destruction. On June 8th, a French resistance meeting was caught by surprise in the tiny hamlet of Gabloudet. At least 40 members of the resistance were killed. 70 were captured, and their meeting place was burned to the ground. The very next day, in Tully, France, 99 suspected dissidents were hanged from lampposts and balconies throughout the streets. Another 150 citizens were deported to death camps. As horrible as these days in history were, they cannot compare to what happened on June 10th, 1944. Just 4 days after D-Day, the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, led by Sturmbannführer Adolf Deichmann, entered the small rural village of Oradour-Sur-Glane and surrounded it. They blocked all exits and began rounding up the citizens. They told Mayor Jean de Sauter to assemble everyone on the fairground in the center of town. They were there for nothing more than a simple identity check. As long as everyone's papers were in order, you had nothing to fear. Once all 643 residents were assembled, however, the story changed. There were reports of hidden weapons and explosives in the village, the soldiers said. Anyone who knew where the weapons were should step forward. No one stepped forward. Not because these were strong men standing in defiance of an oppressive regime, but because there were no weapons. These were simple country folk who had remained relatively unaffected by the war up to this point. This didn't please Deichmann. He ordered the women and children to be separated from the men and locked them in a church. He then divided the men into 6 groups, placing them in 3 barns, a workshop, a garage, and a wine store. When the order was given, the soldiers fired upon the men. They intentionally shot low, striking the men in the legs and the abdomen, wounding them but not killing them. When they were satisfied that all the men were on the ground, agonizing in pain, they filled the barns and other buildings with hay and lit them ablaze, providing the men with a slow, painful death. Many were burned alive. As for 240 women and 205 children cowering in the church, the Dafür regiment filled the church, first with smoke bombs asphyxiating many. When this didn't provide a quick enough death, the soldiers began hurling grenades into the church, filling the sacrosanct grounds with shrapnel and fire. Anyone who attempted to escape was gunned down. The only woman to find her way out of the church that Saturday and survive, the one to whom we owe credit for so much of this account, is Madame Marguerite Refench. She stated that she found a stool near the altar, and she used it to climb to a window. She then dropped 10 feet to the ground and made her way to a field where she buried herself among the peas. She watched a woman clutching a baby in her arms get gunned down as she tried to follow. Marguerite herself was shot 5 times, but miraculously survived. Just like with the men, after the 2nd SS Panzer Division was satisfied that nothing was left moving inside, the church was filled with hay and set ablaze. The men then moved methodically through the village, going house to house, searching for anyone who wasn't in the earlier roundup. A bedridden elderly man was burned alive in his home. A baby was shoved into the oven in a bakery. Many who were found were shot, and their bodies were dumped into one of the wells of the village. No one was safe, and few survived. Today, the village remains exactly as it was that day. Dr. De Soto's Peugeot Model 220 parked on the fairgrounds, where the mayor's son left it as he went to meet his father during the roundup. Charred brick buildings line the streets, frozen in time. It is the martyred village, a memorial to a horrible travesty that scars the countryside to this day, a reflection of a time that scars the world. In addition to Madame Reflench, 4 or 5 men survived the massacre, all of them from the group that was placed in the laundry barn. A few others slipped away prior to the roundup, and sadly, the last of these survivors, Robert Hubris, passed away on February 11th, 2023, at the age of 97. He was among the survivors from the laundry barn. He hid under the bodies of the dead until the fires were lit. Being shot seemed like a better death than being burned alive, and he made his move. Thankfully, he was able to slip away. This topic has led to so much material that we are going to have to break this up into 2 separate episodes. Come back next week for the Pennsylvania town that won't stop burning, the city that once ran Chernobyl, Henry Ford's Amazonian worker city, and so much more. Until next time, I'm Christopher Demian. This is History Mystery Unexplained, and thank you for listening.